I welcome you all to the I welcome you all to the Industry Awareness Program on CBAM. I welcome our esteemed speakers for today's session, Mr. Arun Kumar Garodia, Chairman EEPC India, Mr. Pankaj Chadda, Senior Vice Chairman EEPC India, Mr. Jayant Roy, Senior Vice President and Group Head Corporate Sector Ratings at ICRA, Mr. Ritabata Ghosh, Vice President and Sector Head Corporate Sector Ratings, ICRA, Mr. Atul Sharma, co-founder and advocate, Sarvada Legal. I also acknowledge the presence of Mr. Rakesh Shah, former chairman EEPC India, and Mr. Suranjan Gupta, executive director EEPC India. I also take this opportunity to welcome all the industry participants who are present at the session today. As we all know, the first phase of EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, will enter into force on 1st October 2023, which is likely to affect the trade in few key products, including cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogen manufacturing, etc. EPC India is organizing this industry awareness program in order to create better awareness among the industry on the key aspects related to CBAM. So I would just take a few moments to introduce our speakers. I start with the speakers from ICRA. So Mr. Jayant Roy, he's the Senior Vice President and Group Head Corporate Sector Ratings at ICRA. He leads a team that handles rating assignments as well as ICRA's research initiatives in diverse sectors, including metal and mining, textile, retail, gold jewelry, and public finance, including the municipal sector on a pan-India basis. He is also a member of ICRA's Rating Committee and Rating Reviews Committee. Mr. Roy has a total experience of over 30 years, of which 25 years being at ICRA. Mr. Roy has over the years handled rating assignments across industries, including both manufacturing and service sectors. He is also a key member of CII Eastern Region Metals and Mining Subcommittee. He has been a frequent speaker on various industry forums. Mr. Roy is quite often quoted in the print and electronic media. Our second speaker for the day is Mr. Ritabrata Ghosh. He is the Vice President and Sector Head Corporate Sector Ratings at ICRA Limited. Mr. Ghosh is a mechanical engineer and an MBA by qualification. He started his professional career with Infosys, where he successfully implemented multiple technology transformation projects for global MNC clients in the banking and pharma industries. After a brief stint with HSBC, Mr. Ghosh joined ICRA Limited in 2010 and carries with him a rich experience in the field of credit rating of corporate entities in India and other Southern Asian countries. Mr. Ghosh specializes in the field of metals and mining and energy and utilities sector. He is also a member of the rating committee of ICRA. Our third speaker for the day is Mr. Atul Sharma, co-founder and advocate, Sarvada Legal. Mr. Sharma is co-founder at Sarvada Legal, specializing in international trade and customs law. He has extensive experience in WTO litigations and has assisted the Government of India in 6 WTO disputes. He has also handled more than 80 trade remedy investigations in 5 different jurisdictions. He has assisted government agencies and private clients in the area of WTO law, trade policy and negotiations, customs issue, and various regulatory laws such as exchange control, food safety, labeling, origin, and standards. He also has an expertise in Indian export controls. So this was a brief introduction of our esteemed speakers who have joined us for the session today. And without taking much time, I now request Mr. Arun Kumar Garodia, Chairman EEPC India, to begin the session with his welcome address.
Thank you, Pallavi. Mr. Jayanta Roy, Senior Vice President and Group Head, ICRA Limited. Mr. Ritabrata Ghosh, ICRA Limited. Mr. Atul Sharma, Managing Partner, Sarvada Legal. Sri Pankaj Chadda, Senior Vice Chairman, EPC India. She is Suranjan Gupta, Executive Director, EPC India, respected dignitaries and participant guests from industry. A very warm welcome to you all to the industry awareness session on carbon border adjustment mechanism, or as we know it, we call it CBAM in short. Evolution and innovations go hand in hand, and various kinds of hurdles and challenges follow, both of them closely from behind. The success of the 20th century industrial revolution was scripted at the cost of carbon emissions. Now, very carbon emissions are endangering our sustainability. Certain supply chains of engineering manufacturing are amongst the most energy intensive, resulting in very high carbon emissions, which are the major contributor to today's climate change. CBAM is a novel policy, and in the coming years, it is likely to set wide precedents in the international markets. Understanding CBAM and its long-term implications is quite complex due to the fact that the main issue that it intends to address is the carbon leakages. The first phase of CBAM, which is to be introduced from 1st October 23 this year, has covered mainly primary sectors, which are contributing significantly to the global carbon dioxide emissions, such as the iron steel 7%, aluminum 2%, cement 5%, chemicals 3%, and paper and pulp 2%. European Union is among the largest trade destination for many other countries, including India. It is a region that has taken lead in maintaining air quality index, quality of living in various industrial competitiveness indexes. Its manufacturing is highly invested in innovations and research and development. Indian engineering exports, besides many other sectors, are likely to be impacted by CBAM. India is a major exporter of energy-intensive products such as steel, aluminium, and cement, which are all covered by CBAM. Some reports have indicated that the cost of steel imports from India could increase to the extent of 20%. Demand for aluminium exports could decline by up to 10% for the EU buyers. Overall, the impact of CBAM on India is still quite uncertain and will depend upon a number of factors, including the response of the Indian businesses and consumers and the actions taken by the government of India. However, it is clear that the CBAM is likely to have a significant impact, such as create additional compliance costs for Indian exporters. They will need to collect and report the carbon emissions associated with their products, and they may also need to purchase carbon credits. This could add to the cost of doing business for Indian exporters, and it could make them less competitive in the global market, or I should say EU market, especially currently. No doubt, CBAM appears to be the initial step towards a significant policy change, and it is important to monitor its impact closely. Where there are challenges, new opportunities also arise. It is also important to explore emerging opportunities that may be on the horizon in order to mitigate the impact on MSMEs, such as low carbon technologies and innovations for exports. MSMEs may explore investing in acquiring better environmental standards. The Ministry of Commerce and Industry, under the MAI scheme, already offers 50% reimbursements for acquiring statutory compliances intended for exports through EEPC India. I'm very happy that EEPC India is organizing this awareness session today. And once again, I extend my gratitude to our community speakers, Mr. Jayanto Roy, Mr. Ritabrata Ghosh, and Mr. Atul Sharma for kindly sparing their valuable time. I also thank all the audience who have joined us here today online. Without further delay, I look forward to an enriching session ahead. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pallavi.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opening remarks and for setting the context for the discussions today. So we start with the first part of today's session, which is on what is carbon border adjustment mechanism, CBAM. And to present this topic, I invite Mr. Jayant Roy and Mr. Ritabrata Ghosh from ICRA. And I now hand over the floor to them to take it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Shah, and a very good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of ICRA Limited, I'd like to thank EAPC for giving us this opportunity to share our thoughts on the topic Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, with all of you today. Now, CBAM is highly technical and complex topic. However, we'll try to keep our presentation simple. And the agenda for today's discussion is, we will start our presentation with a historical perspective of CBAM. We'll try to explain the what and whys of CBAM, the industries being covered under the provisions, and the mechanism for its proposed implementation. Our presentation will take approximately 20-25 minutes, and after the following session, we'll have a floor open for the question and answer session. Let me very quickly introduce the speakers at this stage. I am Jayant Roy, and I am joined by my colleagues, Mr. Ritabrata Ghosh and Mr. Priyesh Ruparelia, who are vice presidents, and all three of us track the metals and mining related industries in our company. Since the current CBAM provisions include both steel and aluminium industries, we have carried out a research on the likely implications of these CBAM provisions on Indian players operating in these two sectors. We will use the steel industry in our presentation to explain the concept of CBAM and its implications. I'll explain the background, and my colleague Mr. Ghosh will take you through the technical sections in subsequent slides. As I said, let's start with a little bit of history here. The story actually began in the year 1990, almost more than three decades back, when an intergovernmental panel on climate change brought out scientific evidence of man-made emissions causing global warming, which would have a severe impact on the climate. Consequently, the European Union set out a path towards the Union's ambitious target of reducing its prevailing carbon emission intensity by 55% by the year 2030 and becoming a carbon neutral continent by the year 2050. Since then, these policies have gone through several rounds of discussions and negotiations and have now been signed into EU law. And this law includes the Union's plans for a carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, why CBAM? The CBAM is necessitated, at least this is as per the stated objective of EU. It's necessitated by the Union's anticipation that as environmental standards become more stringent in the continent, companies based in the EU would simply move their manufacturing capacities to other countries where the standards are more lenient and simply import those materials into the EU, causing what is commonly known as a carbon leakage. Such leakages will, in that case, simply shift emissions outside of EU and thereby undermine its own efforts towards emission reduction. Now, to counter that possibility, EU has brought in CBAM, which will essentially equalize the price of carbon between its own domestic products and imported ones for a selected list of 6 products initially. Let us now discuss briefly how this CBAM is going to work as per the current proposal. The EU already has an emission trading system, or ETS, which sets a cap on the amount of greenhouse gas that can be released from industrial establishments in certain sectors. If an industrial unit releases more than the permissible greenhouse gas, it will need to purchase carbon certificates from the ETS trading market. In the beginning, Each of these sectors has been given some free allowances to work with. Under the current rules, these free allowances for all sectors have been coming down. However, the industries, those 6 sectors which are covered under CBAM, for them the free allowance would be completely phased out between the years 2026 and 34 in a gradual manner. And Ritabhrata will explain this important concept for the steel sector when he takes his own section. CBAM will initially apply to 6 items with high possibility of carbon leakage, and these are iron and steel, cement, fertilizer, aluminium, hydrogen, and electricity generation. The system will conceptually mirror the emission trading system or ETS as we described, in the sense that European importers will need to purchase CBAM certificates whose price will depend upon the weekly average auction price of ETS allowances. During the transitional phase, which begins from October 1st of this year and will continue till December 31st, 2025, European importers will have to report emissions embedded in their imported products without any financial implication for them. However, from the beginning of January 26, these importers would have to purchase CBAM certificates for the amount of embedded emissions imported by them. And every year, the free allowances would be gradually reduced, which means that in subsequent years, an importer will have to buy more certificates for the same amount of goods being imported, unless they can import goods having less emission levels, which in turn means that the importers will either buy from someone else having a less carbon intensive production process, or try to pass on these higher costs to their counterparties from whom they will import. So theoretically, if an Indian steel producer exports steel to the European Union after 2026, he may have to bear the purchase cost of the CBAM certificate, which naturally will reduce his own profitability. At this stage, I would like to draw your attention to the fact, why are we discussing this at EPC level? Because all the sectors that we discussed, steel, aluminium, hydrogen, electricity, etc. Often it may appear that it may not really be relevant for us. However, that is not the case, as the highlighted text in yellow shade at the bottom of the slide shows that there is a distinct possibility that subsequently even downstream industries would be covered. And that is why it is relevant for us to understand and appreciate what CBAM may have in store for us. With this, I would stop here and hand it over to my colleague Ritabhrata, who will take you through the subsequent slides. Over to you, Ritabhrata.
Thank you, Jayanto. Next slide, please. Before we dive deep into the steel sector, we will possibly spend a few moments into understanding how this EU emission trading system works, because the mechanics of CBAM and as well as the EU ETS are almost similar. The basic fundamentals are very similar. If you look at the chart on the left, it represents the total allowed emissions, which is determined by the European Union for all stationary applications. Now, what is noteworthy is that every year, the total allowed emissions is gradually declining. So whatever was there in 2008 to 12, in the 2013 to 20, it is lower. Just to set the context, as Jayanto had said, Europe became the first continent in 2005 to implement carbon pricing. So EU emission trading system came up first in 2005. So phase 1 was from 2005 to 2007. Then there was phase 2, which was from 2008 to 12. Then there was a phase 3, which just ended in the year 2020. So that was from 2013 to 20. We are currently in the fourth phase, which is from 21 to 2030. Now, in every phase and in a particular year, the amount of emission that is allowed for stationary applications. By stationary applications, I mean it can be a steel plant, it can be an aluminum plant, it can be a hydrogen unit, it can be a refinery, everything which has assets standing on the ground. Most of those businesses are covered by CBAM, by EU ETS. And so to that extent, whatever emission that is allowed in EU, every year the norms are getting tightened by a factor. Now that factor is known as a linear reduction factor. It's a bit of a technical term, but simply put, what it means is that for 2023, if I say what is the allowed emission in European Union, that will reduce by the linear reduction factor over what was the baseline emission in the year 2008 to 12. So 2008 to 12 is a reference year. Whatever average annual emission that was allowed in the reference year, in the year 2023, 2.2% annual reduction has to be there over the year 2022. So that's how this mechanism works. And to that extent, you will find two things. This LRF, that is a linear reduction factor, every year it has been tightened, which means that as we emerge closer to 2030, these norms or the free allowances will keep on going down. And obviously, EU has a deadline of 2050. For EU, the free allowances will go down in 2034, as JR has said, it will become zero. So that's the first construct. So there is a carbon budget within which the EU is working, and they are forcing entities to work within the budget. And if you exceed the budget, you will have to pay a tax, which is a carbon tax, wherein you have to buy the emissions from the EU emission trading system, whatever is the excess that you are emitting. So that's about the chart on the left. Now I would request the participants to focus on the chart on the right. Now here you will find that we have given certain intermediate products. Some of you who would not have followed the steel sector may not be familiar with it. You will find that there is an important difference is that here the carbon budget is not based on the finished product. It is based on the intermediate product. So steel is a finished product, the finished steel. I mean, like a TMT bar or a hot roll coil. Whereas how the EU ETS works is that they give carbon budget specific to various intermediate products which are produced in between while producing the final product. So let's say if you are producing steel through the blast furnace route, the various intermediate products would be coke or a sinter or a hot metal. And each of these intermediate products has specific benchmark free allowances. So if, let's say, for the year 2021 to 2025, if I'm producing coke in my unit, my allowed free allowances is 217 kg of carbon per ton of coke. If I am emitting more than that, whatever is the difference, I'll have to buy it from the EU ETS based on the prevailing market price. So that's again one essential technical difference. So to that extent, I mean, when we look at benchmark emissions, given that different steel units have different different facilities, the facilities are different, and to that extent we cannot come at a uniform benchmark for every facility. For every facility the benchmark will be different because the structure of the facilities are different. So that's the second part. Please, if you can go to the next slide. Now, Jayantu had talked about the first six. I mean, they have started with the first six sectors. Now, one would kind of question that why start with these steel first, these sectors like steel, cement, aluminum, hydrogen, and electricity. So here the basic idea is that EU, while they were doing the analysis, they found that these six sectors account for around 45% of the emissions in the EU. So they started out with these first six sectors, and obviously progressively, as Jayantu mentioned, I mean, as and when we emerge closer to 2034, more and more sectors will be incorporated, and at 2024, almost all the sectors will come under CBAM. So if some of the sectors are not covered, things like, let's say auto and or refineries, refinery products, at a later point in time, those could be included as well. It is just a matter of time. Now, for steel, why is it important? Because Europe as a bloc, they are a very large consumer of steel. I mean, collectively, they come after China, though as a country, India is second, but Europe as a bloc, they are bigger than India. And obviously, when you impose this tax in the second largest global steel consuming market, obviously it has international ramification. And that is why, at least for the steel sector per se, even for the aluminum sector also, it is a major development, and companies are trying to figure out how to maneuver through this regulatory change. Priyesh, if we can go to the next slide. Yeah. Now, this slide looks at how carbon prices in EU have moved, and this will, give you a sense as to why CBAM is very important. Here we talk about the ascent of carbon prices. If I just give you two interesting statistics, before COVID, carbon prices in the EU were somewhere around 30-35 euro per dollar. Today, that number is 90 euro per dollar. In fact, momentarily, it crossed 100 euro per dollar as well, but that was a very momentary period. But long story short, what has happened is that because EU is now very serious of achieving net zero by 2050 as a continent, and that is why there's a lot of focus for the industries in EU to, kind of be within the carbon budget that has been allocated. And that is why the prices of carbon in the EU have been steadily increasing. And in the last 2 years, carbon prices in the EU have more than doubled. In fact, since the beginning of 2021, it is around 2.5 times. And as per the IEA, if you look at the forecast of IEA is saying that if I fast forward in 2050, they are saying that they expect carbon prices to be upwards of $200. So that's a very steep increase. So to that extent, as a commodity analyst, we always talk about costs because cost is where the battle is won by commodity companies. We talk about raw material cost, we talk about power cost, we talk about capital cost, fixed cost. Now there is another element of cost we'll have to evaluate, which is the cost of carbon. Yeah, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, now we look at what is at stake. I mean, what is the impacted volume? Especially from the prism of the steel sector. So here, for steel as well as aluminum, one thing to note what is that almost all of the finished steel products have been included. By finished steel, I mean both long as well as flats, mostly. Some of the steel articles have also been included, especially articles falling in HSN code 73. Some of the articles have been included. Just to summarize the impact, if I talk of our steel exports, I mean, we are a major exporter of steel. Almost, let's say around 10% of our overall production gets exported. And Europe is a very important destination for us in terms of finished steel. It accounts anywhere between 15 to 40% of our overall steel exports. And to that extent, if CBAM, obviously CBAM is to kick in from 2026 onwards, so obviously it will be a very, very important change as far as the steel industry is concerned. And obviously players are looking at ways as to how to adapt to this particular change, and we'll obviously look in detail about what are the strategies or tactics various players are, trying to, incorporate in themselves. When you look at steel articles, the impact or the volume or the absolute numbers as of now doesn't look humongous. In fact, the total impacted volume or the volume of exports is just upwards of $1 billion as we speak. And it accounts for around 14% of overall India's exports under HSN code 73. But in terms of absolute value of exports, it's just about $1.4 billion. For steel, I think the impacted volume, finished steel, it will be much higher at about $3 to $4 billion. So net both finished steel as well as steel articles, we are looking upwards of around $5 to $5.5 billion of exports, which can get potentially impacted from 2026 onwards. Next slide. Now we look at the cost aspect, which I had discussed. Now for that, we'll have to possibly go a bit deeper and understand how our steel companies are faring compared to where global or some of the leading technologically advanced steel producing companies are. So the chart on the left gives you a good sense, because some of the major steel producers, be it in the Americas or be it in Europe or be it in Asia, I mean, the carbon intensity is mentioned. You will understand that most of the larger steel companies, the big weights, the heavyweights from the Indian perspective, they are at the bottom end of the CO2 emission curve. And and if you plot it on the emission curve, we'll find that almost all of our large steel companies fall in the 4th quartile of the CO2 emission curve. So what it means that for us, the catching up has to be much fast and much quick, because anyways, we're starting off with a disadvantage in terms of our emission intensity. And if you look at the spectrum at which steel companies are, for India, at least for the top 5-6, average CO2 emission intensity is about 2.5 metric ton of CO2 per ton of steel, 2.6 to be precise. The most efficient globally is Nucor, who produces steel mostly through the electric arc furnace route. They are at around less than 0.5. And Japanese makers are somewhere around 1.7, 1.8. Europeans, most of them are between 1.7 to 1.2. So obviously, and for India, I mean, most of us are upwards of 2.5. So that's where the reality is. And to that extent, we'll have to bridge this gap through whatever technological or other interventions and as fast as possible. Now, in terms of the, the absolute quantum of the gap, I mean, for India, average is around 2.6. If I look at the, the most popular way of steel making, which is the blast furnace route, the global average is around 2.3. Now, 2.3 would mean that global average, we are 12% worse off. And if I look at all the routes of steel making, the average is around 1.9 metric ton of CO2 per ton of crude steel. So compared to all the routes, I mean, at least the Indian leading players are worse off by around 1/3 or 35-36% to be precise. So that's the level of gap that is there at the moment, which needs to be bridged. Next slide. Now, this particular data, slices these, emission intensity by country wise, which gives a different sense because, so on the left, you will find that the pie chart indicates who are the major suppliers of steel to Europe. So you will find names like Turkey, you will find names like China, you will obviously Japan, South Korea, all these names are there. And let's say if I take the case of Turkey, which obviously, I mean, it's, it is very close to Europe. There the emission intensity just about one ton of CO2 because their electric arc furnace is a major way of steel making. So obviously, with CBAM, there will be some winners and there will be some losers. Obviously, a country like Turkey can potentially win because they have this advantage to start off with. Similarly, I mean, if I talk of the Asian players, a country like South Korea, let's say, for South Korea, average the emission intensity about 1.6 as against India's 2.6. So obviously, South Korea is also better placed in terms of adopting to this particular, regulatory change. So to that extent, this is something where, there could be a reorientation of our export basket. So our exposure to EU, unless we are able to adapt in a big way, could decrease going forward. Next slide. I think I'm running out of time. I'll just quickly possibly summarize in the interest of time. This chart is a bit technical, but I'll summarize, what, this particular gives a color. What Jointo had said is about the fact that our free allowances will go down every year. And in 2034, it will be 0. And so this yellow chart, gives the reduction in the free allowances. You'll find that in 2034, it touches 100%. So 2034 free allowances will be 0. The blue line, it indicates the free allowances given to a domestic or a EU-based blast furnace operator. The free allowances is about 1.4 ton of CO2 per ton of steel. So that's the free allowances. And for India, obviously, it is 2.4. So one thing I just wanted to highlight here is a technical aspect. If you look at the annual report of steel companies, you will find that they report both the scope 1 and the scope 2 emissions. Most of the emission intensities that you will find will include both the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions combined. Now, what is within the purview of CBAM is only the scope 1 emission. Scope 2 emission, which is emission that is coming from purchased electricity, that is not within the purview of CBAM. And to that extent, so that's a technical aspect one needs to be aware of. But as of now, scope 2 is not there. But what is said is that 2036, they will start the discussion process. And maybe at a future date, even scope 2 emissions will come in. But as of now, it is not there. So what, long story short, which is emerging is that everything else remaining same. If CBAM is to kick in and if carbon prices remain somewhere around 90 euros per metric ton, which is what at the level that is prevailing today, then between 26 to around 2029, during these 3-4 years, the CBAM will be somewhere around $60 to $70 per ton. And then from 2030 onward, this number will increase in a very fast way because the reduction in free allowance is much steeper from 2030 to 2034. And to that extent, in 2030, we expect it to be around $100. And in 2034, it is around $165. And Mr. Garodia mentioned that for steel, the CBAM could be upwards of 20-25%. And if it reaches $160, obviously that's the level at which it will be there. So tax on exports of steel to Europe will be somewhere around 25% to be is what our analysis suggests. Next slide. Now, what are the interventions? So here, steel companies are trying to look at various interventions. One is obviously reduce the fuel rate, or the amount of fossil fuel, especially coke or coal that you're using in your furnaces. So here, it can be using materials which are much more purer, that is purer form of carbon, of iron. So higher grade iron ore, obviously, or pellets will become one of the interventions, because you need lesser amount of coal for reduction. So that's one. And also companies like Tata Steel are experimenting with alternate forms of fuel, things like coal bed methane or hydrogen, which cannot as of now fully substitute coke. But people have already started, and at least from whatever we understand, around 10 to 50 kg of coke can be substituted by these other alternate fossil fuels. Then there are also other interventions, like increasing use of electric arc furnaces, because electric arc furnaces, if you look at the chart on the right, the emission intensity global average is just about 1.6 ton, whereas for blast furnace it is 2.3 ton. So obviously electric arc furnace is is a better way. And also people are trying to use more scrap in the blast furnace also. Today, Tata Steel is the scrap charge rate in the blast furnace is about 8 to 10%. They are targeted to increase it to around 15 to 20%. And obviously, when you feed scrap, the carbon footprint reduces. There are also alternate interventions, things like increasing use of renewable energy. But as I said, as of now, scope 2 emissions are not within CBAM. But obviously, it's at a later point in time, things can change, and obviously that is what. Carbon capture and storage activities, investments. So Tata Steel in Jamshedpur has set up, JSW Steel is also looking at, some of the cement companies are also looking at these kind of facilities. And scope 3 emissions, as of now, there is no plan of bringing in scope 3 emission in CBAM anytime soon. But still people are trying to focus on that area as well. Things like slurry pipelines or belt conveyors. We are seeing a lot of investment in these areas. Now, the bones of contention. So you will have seen that countries like India, especially some of the other developing countries, are trying to challenge CBAM, because it will adversely affect some of the domestic companies here. So what are the various controversial areas with CBAM? So India, allowing other countries, are saying that it violates the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions. So developing countries are not equally responsible for the global warming. So the responsibility should also not be equal. CBAM fails the test because it doesn't distinguish between developing or developed countries. A country from Japan, steel producer from Japan may have to pay the same tax as a steel producer from India. So to that extent, it fails this test. And what we see is that India may formally, lodge a complaint based on this principle. Now, to what extent it will be as per the WTO rules, maybe our next speaker can give us light on that. The second is that CBAM fails the test. CBAM, what it happens is that FTAs, it can make FTAs ineffective. So today, what happens if there are countries which have FTAs, and you may not be able to, there may not be any taxes on, on goods, but just because there's a carbon tax on by Europe, the FTA can become ineffective. And the third is, controversy about CBAM is the basic construct of CBAM. And some of the flaws which is getting pointed out is that there are more free allowances through the BF or the blast furnace route, and less free allowances through the electric arc furnace route. And electric arc furnace route is much less carbon intensive compared to the blast furnace route. So technically, this should not be the case. So you are incentivizing more polluting forms of steel making over less polluting forms of steel making. So that's one of the arguments. And the second is that CBAM taxes production, whereas it should actually tax consumption. So hypothetically, if there's a country which doesn't produce anything but only consumes and keep on consumes unlimited, there will be no carbon tax, but actually it doesn't solve the purpose. So these are some of the general criticisms about CBAM. I go to my last slide. We are really short of time. Now, what are the various mitigating factors? So when we speak with various steel companies, various aluminum companies, one of the things that we are hearing is that there will be dedicated lines which will supply to CBAM markets, lines which are much more carbon efficient, where the carbon footprint is much lower. those will be dedicated to supply to markets where there are carbon pricing norms in place. So that's one of the strategies. The second strategy, which obviously will need some amount of push from the government, is that within the CBAM ecosystem, there is this important concept of energy audit. So you need to have a very strong ecosystem of energy auditors, which at this point in time is not there in the country as of now. So that's something which obviously a lot of focus has to be there, because unless you develop your own setup of auditors who also comply with CBAM rules, there will be dependence on auditors from outside, which obviously you don't want to do. Third, intervention is with regard to a tax structure. Things like cesses. I mean, cesses on coal, various taxes on oil, various other fossil fuels. As of now, those are, though technically you are taxing a fossil fuel, but those are not in the garb of carbon tax. I mean, you are now, unless they're in the garb of carbon tax, you will not be able to get a credit. So there is possibly a need for rethinking as to whether we can do some kind of twinkling in terms of whether whatever taxes that we collect in India on fossil fuels, whether there is a way in which we can get credit for our exports. In the current scheme of things, most of it will not be able to get the credit. So there is some amount of rethinking on that front. And also, you would have heard that Government of India through Niti Aayog is trying to develop domestic carbon market. So one of the construct of CBAM is that if a good is taxed in the home country, then you will be able to get the credit in Europe. So why not develop a carbon market in India, wherein the revenues that is generated gets captured or in India itself. So as of now, we don't have a domestic carbon market, but obviously Niti Aayog is working. And as and when those markets come, obviously the revenues from those markets, from those trading of carbon gets captured within India. And obviously the fourth is incentivizing low carbon products. I mean, there are a lot of schemes in US which incentivizes low carbon, things like 45Q tax credits for CCUS facilities. Those kind of things are not there in India, but and also preferential procurement of low carbon products in government procurement. Those kind of push is not there, but obviously those are things which can incentivize the local ecosystem. So with that, I'll come to the end of our presentation. I'll hand over the microphone to Mrs. Saha to take this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish to thank the ICRA team, including Mr. Roy, Mr. Ghosh, and Mr. Priyesh for explaining in detailed presentation on what is CBAM and its impact on the various sectors, related sectors and industry. So we will have a Q&A session, but before that, I now invite the next speakers. Mr. Atul Sharma, co-founder and advocate Sarvada Legal, and he'll be speaking on the key products and its value chain, which get affected by CBAM, and how engineering MSMEs could augment their capabilities to meet CBAM-related challenges. So over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you. So, because I'm from an iPad, I'm trying to project my screen. Can you just give me about 30 seconds? Maybe I'll do it from my desktop. Just give me about 30 seconds. Huh?
Sure, sir.
So first, I'll figure this out. So first, thank you to Mr. Roy and Ritubrata. I think my job is much easier and half of my slides are redundant. And I'm glad to know that I'm not thinking on very different lines compared to what prestigious institutions like ICRA are also thinking. So I will not waste much time in what CBAM is, because I believe that has been explained very adequately. I would like to instead focus on, as an EEPC, what could be the role of EEPC, in the sense, what should be our ask to the government, number one. Number two, so as Ritubrata pointed out, there is a credit provision in CBAM. Essentially, what that credit provision means is that whatever carbon taxes are paid in the country, you get a credit of it. But I have a slight difference of view in terms of coal cess and other petroleum related cess which are currently applicable in India, whether we will get a credit of it or not. Third is a revolutionary, or not revolutionary, I would say it's just a brainstorming idea which we floated along with Ministry of Steel. So of course, one idea is to develop a carbon market in India, have a carbon price in India. Yes, that as part of a probably a conscious decision of a sovereign, it makes a lot of sense, because we ultimately, maybe we have a longer time frame, but we also have to move towards decarbonization. But if CBAM curtails our policy autonomy, is there an immediate way to address the situation without overheating the market in terms of by levying a horizontal levy like CBAM within India? No, that's the third aspect which I would like to cover. And fourth aspect is some food for thoughts for EEPC members. So who are not the primary steel producers who produce Chapter 73 items. There are three issues which I would like to discuss. If they can take care of it. So now I think my computer is ready. Just give me about 15 seconds and I will project it. Just 1 second, please. Share screen. Just 1 second, please. You can see my screen now?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Atulji, we can see
Yes,
your
we
screen.
can.
Okay. I'll remove the first 4 slides. Sorry, I think there is an echo in this. Yeah, sorry. So, if you see now, Ritubrata briefly touched upon it, what is covered within CBAM and what is partially covered and not covered as of now. One point of distinction which I have with what Ritubrata stated is, right now, if you see, as far as electricity is concerned, there is a debate or some sort of a conflict between an implementing regulation and the parent legislation. European Union currently has an energy directive. So electricity producers in Europe are also under the EU ETS regime. And when they buy the certificates, they inbuilt that price of producing that electricity, enhanced price of producing electricity into their prices. So the consumers of electricity get a subsidy from the state governments which sell the certificates to the electricity producing companies. As a result, what the parent legislation contemplates is that electricity, which is a scope 2 emission, is out of scope of CBAM. So it is not just purchased electricity. If you have to apply a mutative or mirror image, so because Indian steel producers have captive power plants, whereas the European producers do not. As a law firm, at least we have taken a view that for the time being, electricity emissions, whether purchased or self-generated, with a small exception of CHP plants, will be out of the scope of CBAM. But that's technicalities, not so important. How it will affect you is no. So if you see my screen, we are under the category of finished item, finished steel, which is a complex good. So as a complex good, it will include the precursor emission of all the simple goods before that final goods was produced. And this gives rise to some threats as well as certain challenges, which I will shortly discuss. So because we are producing a chapter 73 item, which is the finished item here, the semi-finished, the hot metal and sinter related CO2 will be clubbed, counted when the final declaration for the finished article is filed before you if you are exporting to European Union. Now, the way it works, the computation, the way it will work is, they will look at the actual emission done by you, subtract the free allowance, which Ritubrata very nicely explained, multiply it with the total tonnage of the consignment, multiply with the average weekly prices, and that becomes the base CBAM obligation. From the base CBAM obligation, whatever taxes are paid within India, you get a credit of it. So if there is a carbon tax or a carbon type tax, you get a credit of it. And then you have the final obligation starting from 2026, the final obligation to pay tax. Now, Ritubrata briefly touched upon the coal cess, the petroleum levies, etc. But the way currently the system works, for coal cess, when an item is exported by a producer who has paid coal cess on importation or consumption of the local coal, he gets a refund of it. So under the current credit obligations within the European Union, the tax which was paid, that is 400 rupees per ton, because the exporter gets a refund of it, therefore, because the tax is refunded, you don't get a credit of it in this bracket. So coal cess, even if they are restructured, realigned, renamed, because they are part of the GST regime, and let's say when it comes to petroleum levy, because some ROTIP is under contemplation and there are other schemes which are supposed to give benefit on these taxes, adjustment on account of or subtraction on account of coal cess, etc., looks very difficult. Now, instead of that, the idea which we thought, and I've written a small piece on it, about 800 words, that while our carbon markets are developed, it is unlikely in the short to medium run that our carbon price will be equal to the average weekly price within the European Union. So as a result, let's say if our carbon price reaches about $10 and European carbon price is already at $97, even if we are at the same level of emission, there is still that $80 differential which we will have to pay. So therefore, as an alternative, what we suggested is India, for the time being, can implement a mirror tax, which will be collected by the border, at the border, when the product is destined for European Union. So if, let's say, a Chapter 73 item is produced and sold within India, the tax does not apply. But if the article is exported to EU or other jurisdictions which will implement CBAM, then India can collect that tax, get a credit of it under this box, so that obligation within European Union becomes zero. And India has a ready-made fund now to basically service the decarbonization efforts within the country. India can't give one-to-one incentive. So let's say company X paid a tax of $5,000 in a given year. It can't get $5,000 back as a export rebate, because then this obligation will increase. So therefore, net levy will arise in European Union. But what India can do, or has the freedom to do, is if the steel sector collectively contributed, let's say, $5 million to the Indian levy or this levy, then an aluminium sector contributed, let's say, $3 million. Then in the ratio of 5:3 to the steel company, and not necessarily to the producer who paid $5,000, some incentive is given to move towards greener technology. So that's a thought on which we have written a very short piece, and I'll be happy to share that. It has gained some acceptance, but not a very large acceptance. But we thought this is a better alternative compared to any of the alternative proposals which exist, which will only have inflationary effect within the country and unnecessarily increase the price of steel and steel articles. What is of concern to EEPC member secondary steel is you are also dependent to an extent, because you have to count for precursor emissions. You are dependent on your steel supplier sharing their emission data with you. If that data is not shared, then EU has something called as a default provision. Under the default provision, they will look at exporting producers' actual data, of course, but you don't have the actual data. And if the actual data is not available, they look at average emission intensity of exporting country for the product plus a delta, a proportionally designed markup. And this markup will be disclosed in their implementing regulation. As of now, they have not disclosed this markup. So therefore, if we don't have to pay this unnecessary markup, we have to ask for a proper declaration like the EU importers are asking from the primary steel producers, make a comparative assessment that who's the most efficient one, we use that steel more. And this is one of the talking points where probably EEPC should also intervene and say that if average emission intensity of India is being considered, why EU proposes to charge a markup on this average intensity? So if, let's say, you buy steel from Tata, JSW, ArcelorMittal, and there is a bunch of suppliers, and you have a mix of it, and they refuse to share data with the members of EEPC, then average emission intensity of India for HR or for cold rolled products should be sufficient, and why a designated markup should exist should be one of the asks of EEPC. So that's the first point which EEPC should work on. Second, like I discussed, there are three thought items, thought experiments which you should do. EEPC member should check customs classification. Why they should check customs classification? Because product scope currently of CBAM, of course, in future it can be expanded, but as of this moment, product scope is limited to chapter 73. Now, in chapter 85 and chapter 87, 88, 89, there is a note which says, if parts of general use, if there are steel articles of general use, base metal will cover steel and aluminum, copper, etc., everything. So parts of general use will always be classified in chapter 73. But parts which are which have a dedicated use, or which are made for a particular item which falls under chapter 85, chapter 84, chapter 87, 88, etc., then they will fall under parts and accessories under those chapters which is not covered by the CBAM currently. So therefore, kindly take a relook at the customs classification. It need not be a very extensive exercise. I understand for people who manufacture the basic articles of steel with horizontal applications may not benefit it, But people who are into specialized items, it is worth taking a relook at your customs classification. Second, as I said, ask for a declaration of emission from the steel suppliers. Keep also a watch on the country tables, as and when they get populated by the European Union. Third, Rituprata also talked about the emission being lower of some companies in some countries. It has also got a lot to do, besides the technology being different, it has also got a lot to do with recycling from scrap. Because scrap as a subject matter is not within the scope of CBAM, because it's very hard to quantify the historical emission of that scrap when that steel article was originally produced, probably a decade ago also. So because scrap is not used, or scrap is not covered within CBAM, a steel article which arises out of remelting and processing of that scrap has a lower emission. So EEPC members should also work towards, I understand scrap has limited availability. India does not have a world-class facility. You may not be able to get the desired alloy composition, etc. But still, it is worth exploring the usage or buying the steel from those people who recycle the steel scrap up to your specification. And the last item on my slide, of course, Rituprata covered some of it. CBDR he covered, future FTA benefit negated he covered. There is also a bounce-off effect. Bounce-off effect, if a wall is erected in European Union, the steel articles which were destined for European Union and probably can't enter the European Union market will look for markets which have high consumption. No. So that high consumption market, because India is still the third largest market of steel consumption, there will be bounce-off effect. There will be some trade-related issues which will arise, because these products which cannot enter EU market because of the CBAM levy will look for India as the destination. The fourth bullet is another item on which we probably EEPC should support the exporters. Is currently, as you know, there is a EU-USA dialogue which is happening, which is called GASA, Generally Accepted Sustainable something. So currently, CBAM, from the scope of CBAM, only those countries are excluded which are plugged into the EU ETS regime. Now, with the EU-USA dialogue, USA has no plans to implement the EU ETS regime, but they are arriving at a common agreement. So if such an exclusion is granted to USA, it is an irrational exclusion from the scope of CBAM, which India should resist, because notwithstanding the above concerns relating to the legality, this exclusions basically is the exclusion of the global South, which the global South must resist. The next item is also another agenda item which EEPC, for which support from EEPC will be required, and that is an illustration of circumvention. So before the regulations start, there is what we call as recitals. So in the recital, there is one clause which talks of or which gives illustration of the circumvention, that if a producer exports less greenhouse gas emission intensive product to the union and keep more greenhouse gas emission intensive product for other markets, including India, then that's an illustration of circumvention which the commission should check. Now, in the legislation, the text of the legislation, this sentence is not included as an illustration of circumvention, but this is also something worth exploring, because it gives a wide discretion to the European Commission to treat this practice as a circumvention in future, which India must resist. Because, as Rituprata explained, there will be some developments. So some of the large producers are currently exploring dedicated recycling facilities. They are exploring which facility or if there are two different types of furnace within the same facility, then dedicate one line for probably catering to the global north, whereas the other line for catering to India and other countries. All their efforts would be redundant if in future the European Commission decides to exercise its power under the recital, which is to treat this practice as a circumvention. So with this, I don't have anything much to add to what the esteemed speakers from ICRA stated, and I'm happy to answer any questions which you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the detailed presentation and for sharing your perspective on this very important topic of CBAM. We have a few questions from the audience, and we would now take the questions for the speakers to address. So the first question is from Ms. Kamna Agarwal on what about the steel components, whether tools, fastener, auto parts, how are they implicated by CBAM?
Yeah. Do you want me to take this or?
Yes, sir. Any of the speakers, yes.
So if you see currently the scope of CBAM, the screws, bolts, nuts, which are items covered within, I believe, 7318, they are part of the CBAM, but there could be some specialized fasteners which could be treated as parts within chapter 84, 85, and 87. Those will be outside the scope of CBAM. So general use fasteners, screws, bolts, nuts, hooks, rivets, cotters, washers, etc. are included within the scope of CBAM, but not the specialized fasteners.
Thank you, sir. I see that there are a lot of questions related, to the chapters which are covered or which are going to.
So 72 is covered. If I can answer some of the questions, chapter 72 is covered by CBAM. 84 is not covered. 73, lot of headings are covered. Some of the headings are not covered. So in the CBAM, there is Annexure 1, Annex 1 in the parent legislation, which gives the list of items which are covered. So if you want me to just quickly read it out, 7301 to 73.
Sharma, what I can do, I'll share the link. Let me just share the link.
Sure.
I think members can just take it from the link. Yeah, I've shared it.
So in brief, 7301 to 7311 is covered, then 7318 is covered, and 7326 is covered. So 7312 to 7317 and 7319 to 7325 are outside the scope of CBAM.
Thank you. I think yeah, Mr. Ghosh has also shared the link. It would be very useful for the members to just have a look at the list of products and see if they are being impacted.
And I see Pankajji and Sureshji, their hands are up if they want to ask a question. I don't know. Sureshji, good to see you.
Same here, Atul. Same here. Atul, my question is, we are using a lot of European steel for making pipes. What will be the impact of that? Or we have to obtain an emission certificate from those companies and again attach it with our output?
Yes, sir. So in fact, some of the importers have already started asking. They are asking for a declaration from Indian exporters more than what the legislation requires. So same thing you will have to do, that ask for a declaration from these suppliers of steel as to what their emission is. And no, then I think it's pretty straightforward mathematical exercise after that, sir. So.
Okay.
Mr. Pankaj Chadha, I request you to kindly ask a question.
A few points. One was, as of now, there is no road tap on chapter 72. So
Correct,
therefore, there is no credit for it at all.
Correct, sir.
And the cess is so far not rebated on the road tap, so it should be a cost.
No, sir. Pankajji, just one thing I would like to say. So not necessarily road tap, because under the GST regime itself, you get a refund for the coal cess which is paid. No.
I don't think so. I
Yes,
don't
sir.
think
It is. It is, sir. It is.
because the steel makers have put the coal cess in the application for road tax. So if
No.
they have rebated by it, I don't think they would have put the application.
Sir, I am 100% confident it is rebated.
We'll have a look at that.
On
That was,
yes, sir.
two was basically is that as EPC members, we have a basic challenge is most of us would be buying from trade, right? And if you know how the trade operates, the trade would hardly be able to support us for getting the CBAM certificate for the steel that we are buying from them. Even though the steel is bought from a chapter, one of the big steel plants, generally speaking, the trade is not very supportive on giving the details of the carbon emission because they themselves know about it. Two, what happens to the secondary sector? Because the secondary sector is the major supplier of this item. So what happens is that suppose the secondary sector is supplying us the steel. They are not doing a carbon emission test or they're not doing an energy audit. So they have no clue about this thing. How do we go about getting certificate of carbon emission? Because after all, as you said, my finished product has to have raw material carbon emission embedded in it. We are having challenges on doing that. Then we also have a situation that India's most of the steel is coming out of the carbon steel, the major steel, the basic steel is coming out of the blast furnace. It's not coming out of the electric arc furnace route. While for Turkey, they don't have a blast furnace. They are all from the electric arc furnace. That is why they are at 500 and we are at 2500 or 2700. So therefore, we will end up having a huge challenge competing with Turkey, which is one of our biggest competitors as far as carbon steel is concerned and alloy steels are concerned. Then also what happens on the generation of electricity, which is coming in now into the CBAM, this thing, because we are buying electricity from the grid. Now, I don't know what the
electricity will not be, there is no emission associated with electricity as of now till about 2036. There is no impact of this electricity into your emissions. Sir.
It's okay. And then the last point is most of the export is from the MSME sector.
Yes, sir.
Can there be an exclusion for the MSME sector? Because to get the audit done of their own process, I don't think it's an easy process and it's a costly process. So how much load that we want to give to our MSME sector, or the government has to give us some subsidy to be able to pay, because I think an energy audit would just cost 10-15 lakh rupees at least, if not more.
Yes.
So how does the MSME sector cope up with these additional costs that is there?
So should I answer? Should I give a quick reaction? In the sense, I don't have all the answers. You raise very valid point. But a couple of quick reactions, sir. So while steel and EEPC has not faced this, such kind of regulatory interventions by the EU are not unique. Those your brethren in the chemical sector will tell you the far-reaching impact of REACH, which is the European equivalent of a standard on chemicals and pesticides and insecticides, had on the steel trade. So we cannot reasonably expect an MSME exclusion, while we can always ask for it, but it is highly unlikely. So what will emerge is, instead of a very fragmented industry exporting to European Union, probably 3, 4, 5 or a handful will look at as an opportunity, will make that investment, because if the tax is higher and the audit is higher, the price realization will also be higher from the European Union. So I understand it could have a very devastating impact if the exporter is fragmented. But I am sure that some of you will take this as an opportunity, get those certifications done, and basically capture the market, like what we did for the chemical sector. So that's one. On the issue regarding electricity, as I said, electricity as of now is not a cause for concern, and it should not be a cause for concern for the next at least 10 to 12 years, till the time energy directive is in place and the EU consumers of electricity get a subsidy. The scope of electricity will be outside the scope of CBAM as of now. So that's the only thing which I can say. On your point of not having valid declarations, there will be a cost benefit analysis associated with not having declarations. So there will be a default table with a markup. Probably 9 out of 10 suppliers will not share their emissions with you. There could be one who will again take that as an opportunity that because my competitors are not sharing, let me share my emission so that the Indian consumer buys from me. So these or lack of data tend to have an equalizing effect. There will be challenges, but at the same time, there will be opportunities also. No, that there
Sir,
could be
if
some.
I'd like to intervene.
Yes, sir.
The MSME sector has a huge challenge buying the steel itself.
Yes,
so
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
we are in the driver's seat. So
Yes,
for us to be able to challenge or sort of the raw material suppliers, I think the chances are next to nil. So
yeah. So in which case, default values plus a markup. So let's say if the government can negotiate that the markup is not reasonable or markup should not exist, then EU has or EU will have the data of India's HR steel emission, India's CR steel emission, which you can take, which you can adopt. So even if the supplier doesn't give the actual declaration, the India average data will be available with the European Union, which they will publish, which you can utilize. No.
But what about long products? What you have said is HR and CR. What happens to long products?
So they will have whatever product is exported to European Union from a country, there will be a country table for that product.
Okay, fair enough. That should be good enough.
Mr. Chedda, another point, let me just bring in another aspect. This is related to the technology of, let's say, steel making. See, you mentioned about electric arc furnaces. India has about, out of a total installed capacity, let's say around 25% is electric arc furnaces. But today, you would be surprised to know that in the electric arc furnaces, which are supposed to use scrap, we are not using it because scrap per se is not cost competitive. We are using hot metal, which is an output of the blast furnace in most cases. Now, what will happen is that if you bring in this element of carbon tax, because whereas as you saw in one of our slides, that in scrap way of steel making, the intensity is about 0.6, 0.7 EF, whereas in BF it is 2.3. Now, scrap can actually then become an attractive proposition depending on the market that you are going to. See, you will find a transition in which many of the electric arc furnaces, even induction furnaces, today you talked about long products, most of the players in the input charge in the long product, they use bulk of it is DRI, which is sponge iron, and very little of scrap. Scrap is very little because obviously it's very expensive.
Very expensive, not viable.
It is not viable. But let's say, but that sponge iron is a very high carbon footprint, right? So if depending on the market that you are supplying to, you can change your charge mix. You can load more of scrap. The technology, with the existing technology, you can do that.
Sir, with the normal carbon steel, I can tell you there is not a single scrap electric arc furnace which is viable. I mean, you can ask, I'm sure there's a lot of them in this conference. I can guarantee you without a doubt that not one single electric arc furnace is viable to make carbon steel.
Mr. Ghosh, the things are changing. I would like to share with the House. Government of India has set up a steel recycling also, automobile recycling, and a few plants are coming up for that. All the automobiles beyond 15 years of lifespan, they will be gone for shredding, and that the scrap will be used as a recycled scrap. And many major producers, they are in the offing to set up their facilities on the melting furnaces. Tata Steel is going to set up one plant in North India, one plant in South India. And they are already set up systems. They are going to set up a scrap shredding facility in around Jamshedpur. So these things are going to augment the supply. But the most important thing, like Atulji also mentioned, you also mentioned, the steel plants, when they are producing steel, they have to process today. Either it is coming out of blast furnace or it is coming out of the, say, scrap steel produced, whatever, electric arc furnace. So at inception, they should supply the test report of that, like they are supplying test report to the market for every batch production. Similarly, they must have a discipline to supply that carbon footprint also together, so that we don't have to keep on hankering कि किस plant से आया है, किसका क्या है, क्या नहीं. Because ultimately that system has to come into place. Otherwise, who will buy their steel for exports? Nobody will buy from them. Ultimately, they have to sell the steel in domestic market only. How much export can they do? They can do maximum 15-20%. So I'm sure with times to come, they will also come back to us. We have been in dialogue with them. If I were to supply this CBAM certificate to the downstream industry, so that we know how much footprint has been created by you and how much we are going to create. So that whatever carbon footprint, whether we have to buy the credit or not buy the credit, that we have to discuss with our government. And government is very much going to help SME sector for whatever registration, audit, whatever is there. Government will definitely come forward. We have already spoken to them. They will definitely help MSME sector. So this is what I wanted to mention.
Thank you.
I
Thank you,
think
sir.
Maheshji had some question. Maheshji's hand is
Yeah.
up. No?
Sir, under chapter 72, ferroalloys also falls. That is
Yes,
the
sir.
ferromanganese, silicomanganese, ferrochrome, etc. Are they
Yes, sir.
also clubbed together with the steel, or it is being left out?
Not all, some of them. So if you see the link, 72 ferrosilicon, ferrosilicon manganese. So not everything, but about 80-90% of these ferroalloys are covered within the scope of CBAMs.
Okay. Secondary, sir, regarding the coal sales, as you said, it is convertible under the GST. The benefit
Yes,
is available to the manufacturer exporters only. If the
correct.
goods are exported by the merchant exporters, such
Yes, sir.
benefit is not being extended either to the manufacturer or to the merchant.
Absolutely, sir. Correct, sir. That
And
is
the credit
absolutely
is
correct.
and credit is subject is to the extent of the goods exported to the manufacturers only, not the entire value.
Correct, sir. Correct, sir. Absolutely correct, sir.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we also have Miss Sangeeta Godbole madam with us. We have been fortunate enough to work under her guidance in our various assignments. So she has shared a very few valid points for the House to take on. Ma'am, would you like to share your perspective on the discussions here?
Yeah, hi Pallavi, good to see you. And
Yes.
good afternoon, everyone. I think Atul and the others have already done a very good job of talking about CBAM. The only thing I wanted to say was that the measurement, reporting, and verification, that mechanism is absolutely key. And I think that EPC must go after government to ensure that that mechanism is put in place, at least for those industries that want to export to EU, right? If not, our industry will end up paying penal values of the worst performing EU installations or the worst performing Indian installations. And that measurement, reporting, verification, if you see in the CBAM legislation, it is not an easy thing. It will take time, but that has to be done because CBAM is not going to go away. More and more countries are going to come up with their own CBAMs. और उसका basis यही है, अगर at least industry has to get a reasonable, fair chance. Basis ये है कि हमारा एक ढंग का measurement, reporting, verification mechanism होना चाहिए जो government ने करना चाहिए. तो ये that was the only little thing that I wanted to say. और मैंने chat पे ये बोला है. And congratulations to EPC for doing this very big seminar, and also I hope all the participants will definitely benefit out of this. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll certainly take it up with the government and various ministries and departments. So if there are no more questions, we will type our email ID in the chat box in case there are any questions or concerns in the future. Please feel free to get in touch with us. Now we come to the close of the session today, and to present the formal vote of thanks, I request Mr. Pankaj Jagda, Senior Vice Chairman, EPC India, to do the honors.
A very good evening to everyone. I'm honored to be here to conclude this industry awareness program on carbon border adjustment mechanism on the Indian engineering sector. I would like to thank all of you for attending this program and for your participation in the discussions. I myself had a couple of points which I shared, and I'm sure it was informative, and also it was informative to me also. Some of the points were clarified. The balance will definitely push the government to clarify. The CBAM notification is a significant policy initiative that is likely to have a major impact on the global economy. And it will definitely have an impact on the export of Indian steel as well as from the steel from the Indian engineering sector. So therefore, as everybody said, it's important that we act on it. And it's important to have a verification mechanism and a measuring mechanism in place by the government. Because once there is a measuring mechanism, then at least as it's looked like, we will not have to pay the penal values. Otherwise, all of us will end up paying the penal values unless the EU agrees to a value of the country, agrees that since there is those who don't have the value can at least use the country value. I would like to thank all the speakers, Mr. Jayanti Roy, Mr. Ritabhatra Ghosh, Mr. Atul Sharma, for having shared their insights on this important issue. I would like to thank them all for their really great contribution in this. I would like to give my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Arun Garodia, our chairman, under whose guidance this session was held. I would also like to thank Mr. Suranjan Gupta, ED, EPC, and his team who have put together a very informative and thought-provoking program that has been, I hope, well received by the participants. I hope this program has also raised awareness of CBAM and its potential impact on the Indian engineering sector. And I'm glad to learn that EPC India, with support from Ministry of Commerce and Industry, is organizing series of capacity building programs on green manufacturing and renewable energy, starting 25th August in Mumbai, followed by another in Delhi in October. I would like to congratulate Team India for having set up such a wonderful program, and sincere thanks to all the speakers and also to the participants for sharing their time on this important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And Mr. Ghosh, I have been receiving several requests. I know your presentation was a confidential document, but still the industry wants, a few insights to your presentation. So if you can cut out the confidential part and share a truncated version with us for circulation to our members.
I'll come back to you on this, Pallavi. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pallavi, can
Yes.
we circulate the list of the product that is covered under the CBAM, as Atul was saying? So that can be of a great help to and for the knowledge of all the members.
Clearly, there is a link which is there in the chat. You can just take the link. Within that, you will find there is an annex. You just download the annex. There you will find the entire list.
We will also circulate it also to all our members who are not here.
Right. So once again, thank you to all the eminent speakers, and thanks to Chairman, Senior Vice Chairman, the Working Committee members of EPC India. And I also wish to thank my colleague, Mr. Mayank Krishna, for being the technical host and for coordinating the session. Thank you all. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Mr. Roy, Mr. Ghosh, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, BBC. Thanks all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you.